All right, so we can go ahead and get started now. Thanks for joining again, everyone. So we have some wonderful panelists with us today. So to get things started, we'll just kind of go around and introduce ourselves. But I can go ahead and get started with that. So my name is Nicole. I would be in my fourth year right now, but I am currently taking a research year between my third and fourth year of medical school. But I'm from Alabama originally. I am applying into dermatology soon. Yeah, that's a little bit about me. And then let's see, maybe Vince or Vincent, if you want to go next.
Hey guys, my name is Vince. I'm in the MD PhD program, post grad school. I just matched into school medicine and rehab, and before coming back to med school, I spent many years at the National Institute on Aging, NIH. I know some of the submitted questions were about time off, so I can help answer some of those questions later. Originally from Baltimore.
Awesome, thanks. Brett, if you want to go next.
Hey everyone, my name is Brett. I'm from Anaheim, California. I'm also part of the Drew program, and I matched into family medicine at UCSF. Very excited to be here.
Amazing. It's so fun to hear where everyone matched. Brandon, if you'd like to go next.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm Brandon. I'm also an MD PhD student. Oh, hold on. I don't know why that happened. Hey, I'm Brandon. I'm also an MD PhD student. I just matched internal medicine at Cedars-Sinai, the PSTP program, which we can talk a little bit about that later if people are interested, but that is a fast track into fellowship. So I'm also going to do HEMONC there as well. I was also an undergrad at UCLA as well, so you know, I've been at UCLA for 13 years, so excited to move on from UCLA.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah. So we have some really great people on the panel tonight. Lots of different and fun perspectives. So we'll get, this panel started off by asking you all the question. Let's see. We'll start with what helped you move from feeling uncertain to more confident in your path and pursuing medicine when you were an undergrad as a pre-med? I guess I can start just to kick things off too. But for me, I think I'm more of a lot of people had a similar like feeling when they were little that they just wanted to like help and be involved in science. And so I always kind of wanted to be a doctor from when I was like tiny, and I tried to convince myself otherwise. That was kind of how I thought about it. I was like, let me see if I want to pursue anything else. So during college, I minored in entrepreneurship because I had never really thought about business, and both of my parents are kind of in like the sciencey fields as well. So I had never really gotten exposure to the business side of things. So I had a lot of fun, like doing that minor and really getting exposure to the business side of things. But I think it confirmed for me that I really wanted to like work with patients directly and not, maybe like work with medical devices, for instance. And I think the thing that most confirmed it for me was working in the ER is where I did most of my shadowing. And I highly recommend it as well. It's a great place to get experience and get exposure to a lot of different things. And also, the attendings have more time to talk with you when there's downtime. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what confirmed it for me was actually just shadowing and seeing patients and wanting to be on the other side of things, being the one to see them. Yeah, and then feel free to jump in other panelists if you have a good perspective.
That's so funny because I entered UCLA undergrad as a business major, and then I switched my major to the sciences because I did this like research fellowship over the summer before I went into college. And I absolutely fell in love with scientific research and kind of the impact that it could make on the world and health. Um, so up until my senior year of college, I was kind of thinking more so along the lines of pursuing a PhD. It wasn't until like winter quarter of my senior year, where I was doing some research and realized that like some of my research questions were not like the most relevant or the most important to like helping advance human health. And so I decided to pursue the MD PhD and kind of take on medical school as part of a supplement to my research career. And throughout the process of doing medical school, I actually did fall in love with medicine more than I had thought I would, going into the program. So I really didn't, I guess, discover my passion or love for medicine and actually like practicing medicine and seeing patients until like during my clinical rotations in medical school, actually.
Oh, that's really cool. What a fun path. Yeah, I love that. Vince, maybe?
Yeah, so I want to highlight how everyone was kind of unsure for a while, and it's probably kind of an advantage to come into medical school being undifferentiated and not knowing what you want to do, but at least having that interest. I think back to um, I did an internship at University of Rochester Med School. Former dean of that school is a deputy director at NIH. He gave a talk to us trainees at one point. He's like, you guys get so caught up on making the perfect decision. And there is no perfect next step. You have to use the information available to you to make the most informed decision, which is what all these experiences you're gathering help with right now. So try to focus on traits. What am I building that's going to be important to me? Because those are the things that'll chew through the application process and through the actual journey. Focus on resiliency, compassion, empathy, hard work, creativity. Because I was going to be a jazz guitar major. And then my grandmother got sick. This is like senior year of high school, did all my auditions. I'm ready to go to music school. And then I changed my mind. I did exercise physiology at a small state school in Maryland because I was interested in exercise and metabolism. How does exercise keep us healthy? I spent as much time as I did at NIH because I still wasn't sure. So I thought I was going to do a PhD. I was like, well, there's this other route, the MD PhD, or do I just want to do medicine? But all of those experiences that I had in undergrad, taking time off to do research, and ask these sorts of questions, and realize that you just got to make the best decision. And it all starts with an interest, but you don't really know what it means to be a doctor until you start doing trainee, and you don't realize how many people come into medical school saying, I just know I like this, or I'm interested in, patient care and health. And you don't know what you don't know. You may fall in love with something that you didn't even know existed before medical school, like I did. I was going to do internal medicine, endocrinology. I study mitochondrial metabolism. And it took me a while for mentors and people saying, hey, I hear you say you want to do this thing, and it sounds like it's this specialty. Took a long time for me to come to terms with that, even in medical school, because it's not something I ever heard of, physical medicine and rehab, but it fit what I wanted to do. So focus on traits, think about what's going to build you as a person to help differentiate you throughout this process, but that you'll fall back on through your journey. And it's okay to be undifferentiated.
Yeah, that's such great advice. I would say for me, there was definitely a lot of uncertainty throughout my journey. I'm a first generation student, very proud son of immigrant parents. I had no idea what I was doing going into college. I had this idea that, hey, maybe I'll try being a doctor, having zero clue what that meant or entailed. Um, but I do remember the moment where I felt more certain was I was volunteering, and part of my volunteer role is I got to be part of group medical visits, which are more group style like types of care. And that's where I really got to dive into my community members and seeing like what are the disparities were and the gaps that there are within our healthcare system, and reflecting on how that impacted me and my family and the people that I grew up with. So that's really where I started finding my passion for medicine and saying, hey, I think I could do something as a physician. But of course, I think another part of my journey that was uncertain was the academic portion of it. So what helped me become more confident too was doing a post-bac program. So I did a post-bac program at UCSF, which really gave me the structure that I needed in order to figure out, okay, how am I going to get to medical school? So also if there's anyone who has questions about post-bac, happy to answer any of those. But yeah, I would say it was being out there through volunteer work and seeing what impact I could make.
Yeah, wow. It's always so interesting to hear everyone's backgrounds because just all of my classmates, so many of the people that I know in medical school, like also have very interesting, backgrounds. And one of my friends was, in retail before. One of my friends was in like private equity, had like all different, careers before coming to medical school. We have like one of my friends has like three children and is in medical school, which is very impressive. So yeah, there's a lot of different paths to medicine, and I think, it's not always a straightforward path, and I think it's actually becoming more typical that people don't go straight from undergrad right into medicine. And I would encourage that. I would say a lot of people in my year ended up taking like 2 gap years on average, but a lot of my classmates also took like 5 gap years, or had a whole nother career, or 7 gap years. Um, and I think just some advice I would give, to myself as a undergrad and to any pre-meds in general is there are other careers other than just being a doctor in medicine. It's good to really look into, the different healthcare professions out there. So, there's being an NP or nurse practitioner, and that takes 2 years. So different than, 4 years of medical school, and then the additional years, usually at least 3 for residency. But there's other things too. You could look into being like an ultrasound tech, which would be very interesting. You could, just ultrasound babies all day if you'd like, um, or ultrasound different parts of the body too. Yeah, X-ray techs exist too. So, anyways, there's a lot in medicine, and I would encourage everyone to keep your mind open as well and explore those a little bit before you dedicate yourself to medical school. All right, that's just my little spiel. But we can move on to the next question, which is, let's see here. What will be a good one? Okay, I like this one. So, how did mentors guide or shape your journey to medicine and to medical school? And anyone can go first. I think I've talked for too long.
I can address that because I've had many mentors throughout my training, and whether it was undergrad at the small state school, at NIH, here between med school and grad school at UCLA. And I think the first thing you gotta get comfortable with is being uncomfortable and asking those questions. Sometimes it's just doing a cold email to try to get an informational interview. And I know it's awkward and uncomfortable, and maybe the success rate won't always be the highest. But NIH always promoted that we do these informational interviews. And that's how I got a lot of information to help me figure out which path I wanted to take between research medicine or both. In addition, I do them all the time currently. Even when I was thinking about, applying to PM&R, being at a grad school, I had this plan set, and then I was like, that's not really what I want to do anymore because endocrinology clinic is soul sucking looking at TSH and A1Cs all the time. So you got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable and be willing to just ask those questions and say, I don't know. There's so many conversations I had where I was like, hey, I just know that I like regenerative medicine, mitochondria, exercise, and I want to find a way to put it together to be a muscle doctor. And there were so many people who would say, you know what, I don't know how you can do that, but I know someone who blah, 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 blah. And that's how you start to figure out, again, you don't know what corners look like when you haven't been behind them yet. And so there's people who are, more advanced in these paths like us who kind of just know a little more of these future steps. So informational interviews, um, and then be okay with saying, I don't know. I think Brandon, you can attest to this, that grad school teaches you be uncomfortable to be comfortable with saying, I don't know, and just that question when you're presenting all your thesis stuff. And that's a lot of medicine is just kind of being curious. And this is a part where you just need to be curious about yourself. And you'd be surprised when you ask for help from other people who are willing to reach out.
I'll go. Yeah, I mean, my mentors, I was very upfront and straightforward with my goals. And I think, that open communication and honesty with your mentors will help them help you, right? And so when I said I wanted to do an MD PhD, my mentors were like, great, like I know exactly, I've done that path. I've mentored other students along that path. Like, let me help you, do what you need to do to maximize your success. And so, that there was a question in the Q&A about like how to find good mentors. A good mentor is someone where, you feel comfortable going to ask for advice. They don't have to be like the most famous professor in the world, or, it could be anyone. Um, as long as, your best intentions, or they have your best intentions in the back of their mind, and they're really trying to help you, they'll give you advice on what you need to like improve on for your application, things like that. But yeah, my mentors were super helpful. Like for example, I had MD PhDs in my research lab that I would shadow in their clinic. After I had expressed, I had said, hey, like, you're an MD PhD. I want to be an MD PhD. Like, can I see what your life is like? Can I shadow you in clinic? And, more often than not, people are like super happy to help. So you just have to put yourself out, put yourself out there and ask for help or advice. And people will respond favorably most of the time.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think more often than not, it's harder to ask someone. But when you do get asked, usually a lot of people are very willing and open to help you out. I would say that a good mentor is someone that you really admire, that you've talked to. It doesn't like Brandon was saying, it doesn't have to be anybody famous, but if there's someone that you run into that's like doing some of the work that you hope to do in the future, or think of, or is doing something that you find interesting and want to learn more, it doesn't hurt to ask them about their journey, their story, and see how maybe they could fill in some of the gaps that you have along your journey. I would also add that I think when I was an undergrad, I thought to myself, I need to find this one mentor who is going to help solve everything for me. And I think I've come to realize that mentors have play a different role depending on what stage you are in your life. Sometimes you might need that cheerleader mentor, someone that's going to pick you up and like, always encourage you to move forward, not necessarily giving you practical advice per se, but someone that's going to motivate you. And sometimes you need someone who can give you that detailed information, like these are the steps you need in order to you submit the application or to do whatever it is that you want to do, get an MD PhD. That was not me. But if that was your goal, there are mentors out there for you. So I think it's more so, yeah, putting yourself out there, being curious. If there's someone that you're like, wow, this person is super cool. I want to learn more about how I can be like them. Just reach out to them. And you'd be surprised. Like a lot of my people that I've reached out to in undergrad are very good friends, and one of them is coming to my wedding soon. So just goes to show you that I think mentorship relationships can start transactional at first, but really like they are people who are there to support you along your journey.
And then
Yeah.
I'll add a little
Oh,
bit
yeah. Go
to the
ahead.
end of that. Like, eventually, when time comes and you ask these mentors for letters of recommendations, um, the best, in my opinion, or what I've seen, the best letters are the ones that will come from mentors who you can like really just have a casual conversation with, and like maybe they'll even ask you to like write or highlight some of the things in your own letter. Um, and I think it just reflects if you can have that sort of like casual relationship with your mentor, it reflects how close of a connection you can establish with that person.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great take too. I do feel like the mentors where you can have that casual conversation will be the best one to ultimately write you a letter because I feel like once you're on that level with those people, they really see you as just like a human, someone who's trying to get somewhere in their career, and a lot of people are willing to help you out. But I think for me personally, um, in undergrad specifically, my mentor just kind of grew out of the research that I did with him. So I didn't initially see him as someone who was going to be my mentor. But I spent a lot of time, with my PI basically, in a research lab doing like basic science research, pipetting and different experiences, taking care of cells and stuff. Um, but he really, became a great mentor. So I think also give people a chance. Um, I feel like you can probably stumble upon some mentors when you're not like looking for them specifically. Um, and that might be a great way to come about it as well. So yeah. All right, now we can move on a little bit to the application. And what experiences did you feel were most impactful on your application? And anyone can go first.
The unique things. A lot of times, everyone is going to look very much the same on paper, and you have to know your audience. It's a tired attending, or if there's, medical student, people on the admissions committee, maybe someone who's coming off their surgery rotation, they got to review these things at night. And so you don't know how long they're going to be taking to review it, what parts of your application they get to review, how in depth they're going to go, um, what's going to be most important to them. Hey, I'm going to focus on letters versus I'm going to focus on personal statement. Um, so the more you can stand out by being just unique to you, don't, go try to do something that's not true to who you are. You'd be surprised. Like I still get asked about jazz guitar during our residencies. They will still listen to the SoundCloud page that you put up your hobby link. So what the advice that NIH gave us was, if you have a hobby, people want to see that you're a well-rounded person. I just put an answer into like, what about, how do you get through the tough parts of med school? It's by being a whole person. And you guys can probably attest, when they're looking for resident applications, they're looking for like, hey, are you going to be able to survive this training path? Do you have the full skill set to do that? And sometimes it's just like, what are your fallback mechanisms for when things are stressful? And so if you have like something unique to you, you take photography, make a website. If you do pottery, like make an Instagram to show it and like give them the link. If you do music, if you write, the same thing, because they want to see that you have interest outside of this. And maybe you're not that person who I've been wanting to do surgery since I was 5 years old, and everything I've been doing is medicine and science. Because at the end of the day, like you will get burnt out, and people realize that medicine isn't the end all be all. That can't be the only thing that sustains you, because it is a community, and being part of the community being means like taking care of all parts of you and showing that, hey, I'm a well-rounded person, because you're going to be asking your patients to do all these same things too.
Yeah, totally agree with everything that was said. I have reviewed applications and I prioritize things like a letter of recommendations, and like different activities. And I don't really look at GPA, or in this case, it would be like MCAT scores. But the other person reviewing your application, like multiple people review your application, another person might prioritize that over your letters of recs or your activities. So you never know who's going to read your application, which is why I think a holistic application is super important, because literally everything matters, because you never know what someone's going to look at. And I totally agree that the unique and interesting thing, or the unique things about you, are what make you interesting and stand out. Like when I read applications, I don't care how many hours someone has scribed or shadowed, right? Like everyone has scribed or shadowed or has some sort of clinical experience. I just gloss over that. I look at like, oh, this person likes to rap and like uses rap to connect with kids when they mentor students or something like that, right? That was just one example. Or another one was like, oh, this person was involved in like some AI startup. That's super interesting. And then that's what we would talk about during the interview. For me, I put in my application that I was a hip hop dancer. And I kid you not, during my interview trail, my medical school interview trail, that came up as like a legit conversation, like speaking topic in at least two interviews, whereas like none of my clinical experiences or shadowing or whatever ever came up during an interview. So it really, really truly the things that make you unique are the ones that will stand out most on an application.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely want to make sure that you pick activities that truly represent which includes within medicine and also without medicine, outside of medicine. What um, what I ended up doing for my three most meaningful experiences was just really reflecting on what were the pivotal moments on my decision to apply to medical school and how my background, my work in that activity helped shape what I hope to do in the future as a physician. Um, so mine were a little bit more science heavy. Like I picked my research, I picked my group visit activity, and I picked my post-bac. And I think that on first glance, or like, okay, another student with the post-bac, another student, doing research. But what I added was, like how it impacted me, not just that I did X amount of hours on this research study, but the type of research that I did, why I was interested in it, how it impacted my community, what I wanted to do about it as a future physician. Those details, I think, really set my application apart from the other activities. Um, and yeah, I think also for the holistic application, like just doing things that you think are true to yourself. You might not think that they are relevant to medicine, but for example, one of mine, like I worked at a bar for like 5 years, and in there, like I had lots of customer service. Like I had to deal with a lot of drunk people. So I think just being able to share, the way that I could communicate with different types of people, provide service, because we are in a service, oriented field as well, really kind of can help with your application. So not just as random as your activities might be, in one way or another, they do connect back to you.
Nicole, before we move on, can I add a little addendum? Usually when I give this advice to people, and I keep saying trait, I didn't explain that. So like there are all these traits that make a good doctor, and I just posted a link to a paper that I had found a while ago about this. And so when you're trying to be strategic with your application, make three columns. One column of traits, one column of activities, a third column of examples. List all of the stuff that we just talked about. Then when you're talking about holistic application, you have all these different parts to put pieces of yourself. You can't put them all everywhere. Some of those traits and activities and examples are going to be really big, and you're going to put those in personal statement or most meaningful activities. But maybe some traits, hey, my letter writers can talk about these things when you're going through and making those lists. And so then when you're asking for a letter, hey, can you talk about my creativity, my diligence, my work ethic, and being in the lab? And then give them some examples because you've already mapped that out. But all these traits make up being a good clinician and just kind of just like being a good person anyways. And that's what you kind of should be focused on. How do I better me so that I can help better others? But in that way, you get kind of a full picture of maybe the strengths and weaknesses of your application. You haven't shown much leadership, haven't shown much volunteer experience, that sort of thing. So it gives you a kind of a roadmap of what you can do and kind of prioritize your time, like I think some of the questions we're asking. But then also it gives you a template to say, hey, this is how I'm going to try to formulate my personal statement. I'm going to ask my letter writers to highlight these parts of me. And then this is what I'm going to put in like my activity section to kind of round myself out. I don't have as much room, but I want to show them this trait. And so try to think of three columns, traits, activities, specific examples, use it as a strength, weakness inventory, and use that as your roadmap for how you fill out your application. And sometimes you may try how to reformulate that to still tell all three parts.
Yeah, I also want to add, like, when we say the unique things about you, what make you the most interesting, we're not saying like go pursue like music just to be interesting or go like become a dancer or a bartender to be interesting, right? Like, really figure out what your passions and interests are and then follow those, and those will automatically be interesting and help you stand out, right? So, like, I mentioned dance for me. I also mentioned that again, I was not a pre-med going into to undergrad, but I was kind of like a product of a like science outreach program that kind of convinced me to pursue science. And teaching and like passing on that torch was part of my passion, right? Like I just felt so appreciative that I had discovered this field. I wanted to also teach and mentor students, high school students, to like help them discover like their passion for science. And that wasn't something I actively sought out to make myself more interesting for applications. That's just what my passions were. And eventually that helped made me stand out on an application. So really just figure out what your passions are and just pursue those.
Yeah, one more quick thing as well. Just a reminder that whatever you submit on your application is also fair game to be asked in an interview. So if you're like, I love, I don't know, like skydiving and it's my passion and I'm so interesting, and then somebody asks you about it and you have nothing to say other than I love it so much. Or I think in interviews a lot of the times we can tell like when someone's passionate about something because you just see them light up and are just share so much about it. So yeah, just be true to yourself and what you actually are genuinely interested in. I mean, it could be something that people think you might think others think is very boring, but when you talk about it, like you'd be surprised how interested and engaged you can get people to be in it as well. So yeah, just be true to yourself.
Yeah, I'll echo what everyone's been saying so far. Brandon, I'm also a dancer, so I put that on, a lot of my or all of my apps, I guess. But I would say, definitely follow your passions, like everyone's been saying, and it really will show up in interviews like all the time. I feel like in every single medical school interview I did, they asked me about dance. Also, I would say you can try to find ways to connect, your passion with medicine too, if that interests you. And you don't have to do this. Like some people that I know that I'm friends with were artists, and so they would, volunteer like on the peds floor and like do art with the kids, which is kind of a fun thing. And then for me during pre-med, I wanted to figure out how to like connect dance and medicine because I thought that was an interesting topic. So I found like a mentor at my college, Wake Forest, who was already doing research on patients with Parkinson's disease and how, they responded to dance, how their movement responded. So it was really cool. I got to work with her for a bit, and then I came up with my own like dance movement project based on that. And I got to, work with kids with different developmental disabilities that affected their mobility and basically just teach dance classes to them, which was a lot of fun, and then kind of see how they improved over time. So yeah, it's really great when you get to kind of combine your passions too. And I think that's a good way to look at it as well. All right, we will move on a little bit to a glimpse into medical school. So, I think the next question we'll talk about is, um, what habit or skills did you build early on in medical school that helped you succeed? Or maybe what surprised you? You can answer either.
I can start. I think a habit that I just cannot live without is just having a digital calendar. Like I cannot function without my calendar. And in undergrad, I would write everything on a notebook, and that notebook would get lost or stained, or I wouldn't look at it. So having, everything in my calendar was really helpful. I actually really enjoy time blocking. So I make sure that I always block off the first thing in the morning on my thing to do is to get some type of movement. So either going to the gym or doing a workout class or something like that. It's already in my calendar. I have to do it. Or I could just delete it. But at least it's a reminder for me to do to do something. Um, and then color coding it. So like for me, like movement is like purple, research is like blue, volunteer work is like a lighter blue, and then like deadlines are like in red or things like that. So I think in medical school, there's a lot of different competing responsibilities that you have to deal with like tests and like prepping and volunteer and working on another application, the residency application. So just seeing that my calendar is colorful and that I'm working on multiple things that are, you know, getting me closer to my next goal has been helpful for me.
I would say everyone talks about the pace of how fast like the medical school knowledge comes at you, which is true. There's like the pancake analogy. You got to eat a sack of 10 pancakes every day or like drinking out of a fire hose. I think what surprised me the most is like maybe sometimes in undergrad you have a discrete course and like, hey, I really learned all this information. I synthesized it. I'm gonna take it on that next one. And that happens in med school too. What made me feel better about it is when someone said, hey, you're gonna learn a lot something, then you're gonna forget a lot about it again because you won't see it for a while. Then, hey, the next time you see it, you'll remember a bit, but you'll have forgotten some, but you'll forget a little less next time. So think about this big undulating roller coaster that eventually sort of evens out. And it just comes with the reps of doing it. And it's really uncomfortable, but by the time like we can all, work up chest pain pretty easily. We can work up shortness of breath. We can work up a headache because we've seen all those things quite a few times. So just realize that it's a lot of information. You're not going to remember all of it, but over time it smooths out when you see it put into practice and realize that you're going to have to learn the same information two ways. One, I like to think about it as like a little set of like file folders in my brain, I color coordinate my notes. And so it's like there's a disease and I know the signs and symptoms are in blue and the labs are in yellow and like special tests are in something else for findings, it's like pink in my notes or something like that. And that's kind of about each discrete disease. But then when patients come to us, they don't say, hey, I'm having a type 2 and STEMI. What they're saying is I have chest pain. And so then when you get that chief complaint, it's when you're kind of flipping through all those little file folders. And that determines questions you ask in your history and physical. It determines, the lab tests you're going to order and things like that. So just realize that you're going to learn a lot of information in multiple permutations. So get comfortable with forgetting a lot of information, understand you'll quickly pick it up again, and just realize you need to find a system to make that malleable for you. And I would advocate 100% all the time group study. Shortcuts the process because sometimes someone understands a concept in a better or different way than you did, and you've been struggling with it. And then once you ask your peer for help, you're like, oh my God, like, yeah, the way you thought about it really clicked for me. And you maybe just saved yourself an hour or two of really racking your brain. So it'll smooth out. Try to find the way, the system that makes it malleable for you, and a lot of groups.
One thing that surprised me about medical school was how like group activity focused it was. I feel like in undergrad, most of my classes were just like study on your own, do your exams on your own type of thing. No really like huge group projects. But medicine is very much like a group job, like a team job. And so they try to teach you early on in medical school, like work with your group and try to figure out these problems and, blah, blah, blah. So that kind of surprised me.
Yeah, I think for me, I'll answer the question about the skills and things. But for me, I guess one of the skills that I built in medical school was learning how to adapt my study method many times. I would say for, each different organ system that we studied, sometimes you'll just have to study differently. And that's kind of a hard thing to describe. Um, and that would have been really hard for me to like understand as a pre-med because I feel like I just studied in one way during undergrad. I made my outlines, I studied them. That was it. I did my practice questions. But in medical school, there's a lot of different resources you can use. There's Sketchy, which is kind of like cartoons that help you remember different things, really good for learning different bacteria. Um, and there's like, just like videos that you can watch to supplement your learning after lecture, which is a really great way to solidify the material. But, all of these different resources, like sometimes, it'll be easier to learn using a different resource. So you're always just kind of like jumping around and trying to figure it out. But I would say, once I became okay with jumping around, it was a lot easier. At first, I was trying to, stick to one method. But I would be open to trying different methods to study, would be the one thing that I suggest.
Nicole, can I add something about question banks?
Yeah, go for
Um,
it.
it's not for early on, but later when you start doing these question banks for like step one, step two, that's a different way to use that as a study tool. And we have like what Center for Academic Excellence here, that they, are kind of like our academic support office. And I had to go meet with them to like wrap my brain around that about how do you use these question banks that are designed for us as a study tool? Because sometimes you do a block of 40 questions and it's like 28%, and you're like, oh wow, I'm so stupid. But that's not the purpose. Like you may have not have seen this permutation, the case presentation, whatever it is. And so learning how to use the question banks in an effective way for you is a really big skill to develop. And it is uncomfortable, even for us now, like studying for our step exams, even after taking step one and you take step two, because I did it the old way in the legacy curriculum where they weren't back to back. It can be kind of demoralizing, but realize that it is a tool for you to learn and that it is about the trend over time throughout all your career. And that was a really big.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that's one surprising thing when you get to medical school. Like, of course, everyone's smart. They made it here. We're all in medical school. So, but a lot of people that are in medical school are used to, scoring really well in their exams. So when you take these, practice quizzes and you only get a 20%, you're like, oh my God, it really is. Sometimes it hits you hard and you're like, shoot, I got a lot to learn. But I think, what I came to learn through taking those, little quizzes on UWorld, for instance, is the names of one of our Q banks that a lot of people use, is that, you can really just use these as learning tools too. Some of these question banks have really great explanations. So if you take the time to like really read those explanations and kind of understand what it's saying, then you can actually learn like, five or six different topics all in one just by doing that singular question because that question is testing you on like five or six different things. Um, so yeah, the question banks definitely. That's a skill to learn. Yeah. All right. Now we will move on to the next question. And that is about balance. So, how do students, balance academics, activities, and personal life in medical school? And feel free to jump in.
I'll say so UCLA is pass fail, and so I was on the legacy curriculum as well, which means my first year and second year of medical school were all like classroom learning type of things. And then my third year and fourth year were all clinical rotations. So during my first and second year, the classroom learning, I had like a lot of free time. And I'm all about work-life balance. So I was always going out, playing video games. I'm not one to study a lot to begin with. Like I hate studying. So I had a great work-life balance, but then that did kind of come to bite me in the ass come clinical rotations where I actually had to use the knowledge that I was supposed to learn um, to help like treat patients. And I was like, oh, I actually don't really know anything now. So I really had to play catch up towards the end of my medical school. All of that to say, like, you need a work-life balance to get through medical school. It's hard, and you again, as Vince was saying earlier, like medicine and medical school and being a med student can't be like your one and only thing in life. There's more to life to live than medicine, and so one way or another, if you don't find something else outside of medicine, you're gonna burn out.
I'll give you guys the advice my mom gave me when I was 18 years old and did something stupid summer before I left college. The habits that you build right now are the habits you will have as an adult. So think about, is this what you want to do for the rest of your life? That being said, taking the time to go to an intramural sports thing, taking a time, that one weekend that your friend wants to go to that concert, going home to visit family, it's all really important. I'm from Maryland, so I was like, I'm gonna spend almost a decade somewhere. let me take my California adventure right now, but being away from my family when I had shoulder surgery was tough. When my brother had mental health issues, and not being able to be there to support him and my family was really tough. So I think part of it is like having a good support system, whatever wherever that is, and maybe that plays a role in where you choose to apply or actually matriculate when you get these offers. Taking stock of that is really important. I have peers of mine who knew that, hey, like I'm a really big part of my family because I'm the oldest and family are immigrants and I translate for them for like important medical legal things, And so she decided like, hey, I'm going to choose to stay in LA because they're an important part of me and I'm an important part of them. So realize what your support system is and what you need so that you can prioritize as you're making your decisions. And also recognizing what your signs and symptoms are. When do you realize you're overloaded? And it's hard because we're used to just going 100 miles a minute. And so the support system is key for then if you don't know maybe what those signs and symptoms are when you're feeling overloaded or burnt out. I mean, someone that's close to you that can be honest and say something like, hey, I'm noticing this, or just kind of a check-in like that to kind of bring you back down when your head is in the clouds. Really good to have. So recognizing your own signs and symptoms and then having that support system, whether it's friends, family, these activities, it's all important.
Yeah, I mean, I think you two said it all very well. Yeah, finding balance is really tough, and honestly, something that I'm still trying to figure out. Like how is it that I can manage everything? Because at the end of the day, we can't do it all, and life doesn't stop just because you're in medical school or just because you're going to be a resident or just because you're doing XYZ. So you really do at the end of the day want to prioritize your overall well-being. Like objectively, like this is why, like, not to go back on my calendar, but why I like seeing my calendar and being like, okay, did I actually do something that I enjoy doing this week? If my calendar is like all red, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I probably should take a break. Or if it's all purple and and blue and all fun, and say, okay, maybe I should probably get some work done. So that's what I use as my objective measure. But yeah, like I think having close friends and family, reminding yourself to surround yourself by people that care about you and that you love, and that can sometimes point out when you are stressed. Like sometimes I would be just so in the thick of it that my partner would be like, you need to take a break. You look like you're very overwhelmed, and I would have not noticed that if it weren't for her. So, yeah, definitely making sure that you have a strong support system around you. And it's just a learning process, like kind of what we were talking about earlier when like you need to switch up the way that you study for certain blocks. I think sometimes you also need to switch up what you're doing for your overall wellness. Maybe it can't be that you do the sport that you're very passionate about every single day, but maybe it's that, you do part of it or you do it once a week or you meet up with some friends as a study break. So just being more flexible and giving yourself more grace.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, it'll probably vary what you do for your mental health, let's say. Just like it'll vary by the phase of medical school that you're in. So, like, third year is usually rotation year, which can get quite busy. So, I also had a lot of, fun times hanging out with my friends the first couple of years, because there was just more time in general. We even were able to find like a really cheap flight to Hawaii for like $200 after one of our pit stop exams. So we just like went there for the weekend, which was great. Anyway, so first couple of years might be a bit easier to find some time. And then third year is when rotations happen. And, sometimes you're getting back, very late, let's say 8 or something from a day of surgery, and you're very tired, and you still have to study for your shelf exam. So, I think there's still ways to kind of decompress. You know, I think a lot of people do a great job of continually studying that whole time, but some days I was just burnt out and you can't study. And so my, break would be just watching Netflix. And that was a great break. I would just mentally tell myself, like, I'm not doing any practice questions tonight. I can't do this. I'm just gonna watch my show. And so I think that's important to do sometimes because, there is a lot of studying in medicine and you'll be studying for forever, for quite some time. You're a lifelong learner once you do decide to if you want to become a doctor. But I think, you kind of have to adjust. So like during my third year, I would spend, some of the weekends where you have more time to just like crank out a bunch of practice questions. And that would give me more time to breathe like during the week and relax because I knew that I wasn't realistically going to do that many practice questions during the week. So I think it's really just about finding what works for you. Yeah. All right. We can move on to the next question as well. Let's see here. That's a good one. Okay. Our next question will be, how did you approach telling your story on your application? And so I can start really briefly. And I think I gave this advice in the last Med Mentors session if you were here. So sorry if you're hearing this for the second time. But I will say somebody told me this and it really stuck with me is that, you know, when an admissions committee is looking at you and they're deciding whether or not to admit you to their school, you're really only as good as you can describe to them, on your application and verbally during your interview. Because if you can't get that across, they really don't know who you are, like they didn't grow up with you, they don't know all the people around you. So you really have to be able to, express that on your application. And so I think when it comes to thinking about your story, it's really important to really think about, what you want to say and how you're going to bring in all of your experiences into this like cohesive story. Um, and there is a way to do it, even if you have very diverse experiences, and you've been involved in a lot, there's still a way to draw, some sort of similarity between them. Um, so for me, for instance, like I had dance was one thing, I had research as another thing, and then I kind of combined them. That was obviously easy to pull together. But then, when I think about back to my time as an undergrad, like I also had a lot of like mentorship activities, and that doesn't seem quite as connected. But when you start, writing about your experiences, you can really start to see how it all becomes connected and how you can draw upon different pieces of your experiences in your application, and still kind of point them along the same line and really convince them that medicine is right for you. But yeah, that's my take on the story. All right, I'll give it up to anyone else.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I was like a product of an educational outreach program. And so my story kind of revolves around like me being a mentor to like the next generation of scientists. At UCLA, I was a part of a club called City Lab where we would teach science to kids on the weekends. I was also editor-in-chief of the Science Journal, undergraduate Science Journal. And so I kind of just linked all those activities together and said, hey, like who am I? I love science. I love mentorship. I'm a product of mentorship. This is like who I am, and this is how I'm like presenting myself as someone who wants to advance like this mentorship chain and like inspire the next generation, I guess. And again, I like didn't go about these activities looking for things to make myself interesting. These were just things that I actually cared about. And so it's very easy to write about something you care about, right? Like you literally just say, what did you do and why was it important to you? And that's basically the core of your essays. So as long as you find something that's interesting and, meaningful for you, the story honestly will come naturally. And then for me, like dance had nothing to do with like I didn't try to like relate dance to like science or medicine or anything. I just listed it as an activity. Um, and again, I wasn't doing dance to like try to boost my medical school application. It was just something that I did, something that I enjoyed, and I just put it on my application simply because I spent a lot of time doing it. And that's okay.
For those of you who are visual, try storyboarding it. Like when I sit down with people and we're trying to draft their essays for medical school, um, we go to a whiteboard. I used to have people come to the lab and we would sit in one of the conference rooms and just diagram everything on the whiteboard so that the template I told you about, traits, activities, examples, we would start just throwing them up there. You I would say think a little more creative. Like I said, your audience, they're reading these late at night, a little tired, and you maybe only have 20 seconds of them reading that beginning part of your essay to really catch them. So like, start in medias res, like in the middle of a story or setting, and really make them smell, hear, feel, like all those other senses. Like paint that picture for them and get them involved to draw them in. If you have that template, something to work off of, but it's hard. Really like put it up somewhere, storyboard it, get advice from other people. But when you're getting advice and people are reading your activities and how you're describing them or your statement, um, take everything with a grain of salt. I remember the deputy scientific director of the NIA wrote me a letter and she was reading my statement, and like the way she changed things, it wasn't my voice. And so I didn't take a lot of her edits. I actually took a lot of edits from another postback who had just gotten into NYU, who really, really helped me kind of hone my essay. So I would say be visual, try to storyboard it out, get advice from others, but also take everything with a grain of salt and stay true to your own voice. If it doesn't sound like you or you don't like it, like Brett was saying, like everything in your essay is fair game. So make sure it's coming.
Yeah. Quick add to that as well. I always recommend sharing it with like, yeah, someone professional, like a professor or your PI or something. But also a friend. I think like if they're reading it and they're like, this doesn't sound like you at all. I think that is really helpful advice. They may not be able to comment on some of the things that might boost you up in terms of like from an applicant perspective or a reviewer perspective, but you want to make sure that's still true to you. Um, I'll say for the question, when I was thinking about how I wanted to do, how I wanted to talk about my story, I actually sat down and I reflected on my entire life, starting from before I was born and thinking about my parents and thinking about what their upbringing was like the type of world that I was being brought into. And then I literally went year per year, like what happened, for my first year of life and thinking about how my parents decided to move back to Mexico and how I spent the first couple of years there, like all of the memories that kind of like helped shape me to the person that I am today was not just like something that I did for my application, but something for myself. Because I feel like we can get caught into like, okay, like what activity am I going to mold to fit like into this type of thing that's going to make me look great? Um, but more so, it's like, what do I actually care about? And why is it that it relates to medicine and being a physician? Um, Once I kind of like really thought deep about who I was, my values, what I cared about, everything else became so much easier because I didn't have to think about, how do I connect this? I already did all of that thinking. In interviews, I was able to elaborate even more about, my passions. So I really recommend that if you're able to, like, really sit down and ask yourself that deep questions, like, who am I? What do I actually want to do? Do I actually want to be a physician? Because I'm gonna tell you, it's really hard. I really did not know what I was getting myself into. Um, Even now that I'm gonna be a resident, I'm like, oh my goodness, I don't know what I really got myself into. But having that reflection really reminds me, grounds me, and the reasons why I'm deciding to keep moving forward with such little sleep and so much knowledge that we have to know. But yeah, and then just a quick thing, like I know that everyone here has done so many amazing accomplishments. So also just taking the time to recognize, all the hard work that you put in to getting to this point. Really like congratulate yourself because
it's not easy to get to the point where you are right now. So you should feel very proud about yourself.
That's really great advice. Honestly, I think I'll take that advice when I'm applying for residency soon. Just like really asking myself those deep questions and, really, really, yeah, thinking about that deeply is great. Yeah. All right, guys. Well, that is all the time we have for tonight. But thank you all to the panelists, for this great, for all the great advice you've given everyone. All right, and have a good night, everyone. Bye.